Since the release of the Lord of the Rings film trilogy, the name Tom Bombadil has almost become a password for Tolkien high society and the most dedicated fan groups of Middle-earth lore, with many people chastising Peter Jackson and the other writers of the film adaptations for not including this unique character in their version of events. Although Jackson and the other writers might argue that just because we didn't show it doesn't mean it didn't happen, it is very safe to assume that the hobbits don't go to Crick Hollow, travel through the Old Forest, or meet Tom Bombadil and Goldberry before heading to the Prancing Pony in Bree. One detail to suggest this exclusion of events is that Gandalf tells Frodo to head to the Prancing Pony in the films before they leave, while in the books it is actually Tom Bombadil that directs them to Bree. Regardless, it has almost become taboo to suggest that Peter Jackson made the right decision about excluding these events from the Fellowship of the Ring, and more specifically, excluding the character of Tom Bombadil. But it is the stance that I hold, as I believe, for many reasons that we'll get into shortly, that including Tom and the 4 chapters between Buckleberry Ferry and Bree would have been a massive mistake. This week we head into episode 5 of my series Movies vs. Manuscripts, where I've been analyzing the Fellowship of the Ring movie compared to Tolkien's original lore, scene by scene. As I mentioned in the last episode, this week we take a bit of a detour as chapters 5 through 8 are completely omitted from Jackson's adaptations. So I thought it would be good to review what happens during these chapters and then discuss why I believe excluding these events and Tom Bombadil was the right decision. So let's get right into it by starting with a summary of what these chapters are all about. If you're already familiar with these chapters and don't want a refresher, there will be a timestamp below for you to skip to the review and go straight to the analysis. So, in chapter 5, our 4 main hobbits have just escaped the Black Riders and are on Buckleberry Ferry heading to Frodo's new home. After making it to Crick Hollow, Fatty Bolger greets them and they wash up and have a nice dinner together. Afterwards, Merry, Pippin, and Fatty reveal to Frodo, to his utter astonishment, that they know about the ring. As it turns out, Merry had once seen Bilbo disappear while the Sackville Bagginses were looking for him, and then after reappearing, he watched as Bilbo put something shiny in his pocket. From there, Merry and Pippin figured that something was not right with Frodo, as they are 2 of his closest friends and spent a lot of time with him. And the final touch was that Sam was actually their informant in regards to the true nature of Frodo's plans. After hearing all of this, Frodo realizes that leaving on this journey alone would be unwise and that he should take Gildor's advice about taking willing friends with him if Gandalf doesn't arrive. And Merry and Pippin tell him that they are committed to the journey regardless of the difficulties that lay ahead. Once he agrees to have them come along, he learns that Merry and Pippin have planned more than they've let on, as Fatty has agreed to stay at Crick Hollow and impersonate Frodo, to give the impression that Frodo is still in the Shire. He also stays just in case Gandalf shows up, as he could inform Gandalf of where the other hobbits have gone. Now, with the group made up and their strategy in place, the 4 hobbits set out towards the Old Forest, despite Fatty telling them that it is a dangerous road. As Merry says, it is better to go through the Old Forest than to deal with Black Riders. Plus, his relatives have carved a path in these woods as they sometimes journeyed through it by day. In chapter 6, the 4 hobbits wander through the forest and even get a glimpse of the Barrow Downs, which were grassy hills used as burial mounds. After finding a river, they continue to follow it and notice a drowsiness falling upon them. Merry and Pippin lay in between the roots of an old willow tree along the river, and Frodo feels himself getting tripped over by a root of the tree and believes that the tree did it on purpose. Sam, thinking to himself that the drowsiness is unnatural, fights to stay awake and finds Frodo. Then he and Frodo realize that Merry and Pippin have sunken into the old willow tree as if the roots have consumed them. After kicking and yelling at the roots, they decided to try and use fire to get the tree to let their friends go. But Merry and Pippin yell from the inside to put the fire out, as the tree was threatening to eat them should it get burned. Frodo, frantically trying to find a solution, runs down the path yelling for help, and to his surprise, he begins to hear singing coming down the road. Sure enough, a person comes bounding down the path, singing merrily, and instructs Old Man Willow, the tree that consumed Merry and Pippin, to let the hobbits go. As the hobbits are freed, they thank the stranger for saving their lives and find out that he is called Tom Bombadil. He is joyful and jolly, and nearly everything he says is in song. He immediately invites the hobbits to his home, and without a second thought, they follow him. In chapter 7, the hobbits have made it to Tom Bombadil's house and meet his wife, Goldberry, aka the River Daughter. They learn that it was just chance that led Tom to meet them, as he was collecting river lilies for his Goldberry. And Goldberry tells Frodo that Tom is the master of wood, water, and hill. After some discussion, they eat with the couple and then go to sleep, in which each hobbit has their own nightmare except for Sam. The next day, they see Goldberry outside as it is raining, and Tom says that it is washing day. Since they can't can't travel due to the rain, they sit and listen to tales from Tom for what seems like days on end. Tom tells them of Old Man Willow, the Barrow Downs, and much more. Eventually, Goldberry comes inside and says that the rain has stopped. After they eat another meal, Frodo finds himself opening up to Tom and even gives Tom the ring freely. Tom takes the ring and puts it on his little finger, and to their shock, he is still visible to them. He takes it off and flips it in the air where it flashes and disappears. Then he gives it back to Frodo as if nothing happened. Frodo, thinking that some trickery happened, tries the ring on to test that it's the real one, and is happy when Merry notices that he is invisible. But to his surprise, Tom looks right at him and tells him to take the ring off and come back. After all of this, Tom tells them that they will set out in the morning and instructs them on which direction to go, and then they go to bed. Finally, in chapter 8, the four hobbits depart from Tom Bombadil's home and head towards the Barrow Downs, which Tom said are perfectly safe as long as they take the west side. The previous night, he had also taught them a song to sing if they're ever in trouble and need to call him. So they depart and head in the direction of the Downs. Eventually, they stop to rest on some cool rocks on the Barrows and find that after waking, a fog has come around them and the sun has gone down quite a bit, leading to Frodo being separated from the rest of the group. Frodo yells for the other hobbits, but in response, he just hears a voice saying, "I'm waiting for you." And then he finds himself being grasped by a cold figure, and then he falls unconscious. He later wakes up in a dark chamber, and slowly, as a light glow fills the room, he finds the other three hobbits laying next to him, but with a sword across their necks. He hears an incantation being spoken around the room, and a hand creeps toward the hilt of the sword. He finds the courage to grab a sword from among the treasure that lay around them in the den, and then he swings at the hand, which shatters the sword while seemingly hurting the hand that was reaching out to kill the other hobbits. He attempts to wake the other hobbits, but nothing is working, and then suddenly, he remembers the song that Tom taught him to sing in a time of need. After singing the verse, Tom's voice is heard outside the barrow, and the side of the den collapses as Tom comes bounding in to save them. Tom sings away the Barrow Wights the same way that he defeated Old Man Willow, and the hobbits escape once again. After this, Tom brings their ponies back to them, who had all run away in the fog, and he tells the hobbits that he will accompany them to the edge of his land. They are overjoyed by this, and they set off. Once reaching the edge of Bombadil's land, he tells them to head to the Prancing Pony in Bree, where the innkeeper, Barleyman Butterbur, will help them. After saying goodbye to Tom and then traveling a distance, they finally reach the edge of Bree at night, and that is where the chapter ends. So, now that we're all caught up on what happens during these chapters, and you can clearly see what has been left out of Jackson's version of the Fellowship of the Ring, I want to talk about why excluding these events was the right choice. Ultimately, it comes down to two words: plot progression. Personally, I think many Tolkien lovers and diehard fans of the lore of Middle-earth get caught up in the mystique and the potential power of a character like Bombadil and just assume that he would be epic in a film. However, in order to make him epic, you need to rewrite what Tolkien portrays Tom as. Before I go into this, I think it would help to give a further description of what we know about Tom, and then hear from Tolkien himself what the identity of this fantastical being is. Tom is known by many names in Arda. The elves call him Oldest and Fatherless, the dwarves call him Forn, which means belonging to the ancient days, and Goldberry, in response to Frodo asking who Tom is, simply replies by saying, "He is." Seeing as Tolkien was Catholic, although he denies having included any religious influence in his writings, saying "he is" seems like a nod to God himself. And many people have wondered if Tom is the god of Middle-earth. But because of Tolkien's vast lore, we know that this can't really be possible, as there are already godlike figures in place, which makes me view Tom and Goldberry as more of an Adam and Eve type figure. They have been there since the beginning of days and are the masters of creatures in all the land. But Tolkien does not view Tom like this. In fact, Tolkien doesn't view Tom as anything. When asked about Tom's origins and who he really is, this is what Tolkien had to say. Even in a mythical age, there must be some enigmas, as there always are. Tom Bombadil is one. Tolkien is essentially saying that even with his vast lore and creation of Arda and Middle-earth, there must be some things that are mystical and unknown to all parties involved, even the author himself. To Tolkien, he wanted to have parts of his own world that even he did not comprehend, and Tom is one of those figures. That being said, let's go back to what I said about plot progression. Tolkien himself once stated that Tom does not serve an important role to the narrative, but was left in simply to communicate a feeling that even Tolkien couldn't put into exact words. But when creating an adaptation that has to fit inside a certain time frame, you have to decide what is pertinent to the plot and what is not. Tom is not. In fact, everything from Buckleberry Ferry until the time they arrive in Bree is not pertinent. When I read and reread these chapters, I was reminded how these tiny moments almost seem like side quests in a larger journey, completely irrelevant to the fight against Sauron, and I think it really comes down to the enemies of these side quests not even being related to Sauron himself. Saruman is a large side quest, but is directly related to the fate of Middle-earth, whereas a being like Old Man Willow couldn't care less about the ring or who Sauron is. He simply just doesn't like some walking creatures existing in his forest. I mean, seriously, the entirety of Bombadil's land is like a snow globe that exists outside the boundaries and time of the rest of Middle-earth. They are great stories and poems for the hobbits to sing about later on, but as for someone wanting to hear about the journey of the ring from the Shire to Mount Doom, a hobbit-eating tree and the Barrow Downs don't serve a purpose. And then we come to Tom Bombadil's singing. When listening to the audiobook, the songs are great and add to the mystique of Tom, but to include these chapters in the film would make it seem like you're jumping from epic fantasy to a musical, back to an epic fantasy. I have nothing against songs in the films, by the way. Aragorn singing about Beren and Luthien is a great example of including Tolkien's poems in the films. But Tom is so jolly and carefree that it would make the journey Frodo and Sam are about to embark on seem like a walk in the park. We would have this massive build-up from Gandalf and Frodo discussing the ring and the end of the world, and then just some guy being like, I can pretty much defeat any enemy by just dancing and singing. Oh, you've got a bow, a sword, and a magic staff? Cool, yeah, I'ma just sing to them. Let's just say I wouldn't want to go up against Tom in a rap battle. But back to the point. Between the lack of origin story and character development for Tom, the entirety of his inclusion in the plot not being relevant to the main journey, and the fact that he sings pretty much everything he says, I think it was necessary for Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh to remove him from their adaptation. Now, if you're making a TV show that covered the entirety of Tolkien's writings, you might be able to do this, but for the project that Jackson had to take on, it just wasn't feasible. I know that this video might catch some heat as based on my channel polls, thousands of people wish Bombadil was in the films, but I have to stand by it. I love the character in the books, and I think it was a great decision for Tolkien to leave his chapters in the Fellowship of the Ring. But this is a prime example of adaptation, which literally means changing something to fit a new format. And I also think we're going to see a prime example of this with the new season of Rings of Power, which recently announced that Bombadil is being included. Once everyone sees how that goes, I think they'll start to understand why adapting Tom to a film or television format just doesn't work. You either sacrifice the quality of the film to keep Tom's character authentic to Tolkien's writing, or you sacrifice Tolkien's character to keep the quality of the film. We'll see which path Amazon chooses to go down for their version of Bombadil. But anyway, this series isn't about that show, but rather Peter Jackson's trilogy. And speaking of which, next week we will be back on track as we pick up things in Bree and the Prancing Pony. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.